I haven't tested this, so we're just doing this live. P. And so our pot now has, you can see this one because it's off screen, but you can see our pots now have meters. And all we really had to do was add our UI bar component to this pot. Welcome back to Arcade. I am Super Tommy, and in this video we're going to look at adding a UI bar to your character where they are. So these little health bars or magic bars or any of the stats you want to put under a character's feet or above a character's head. So we're using Phaser 3.54 here today, and we're going to go into this tutorial using our component system. Now, if you've missed our components videos, do go to our YouTube. That is youtube.com/arcadehq, and we have this component using the component pattern video, and then this component-based character movement video that we're going to basically build off of in this video. So we'll just go back here. This is our demo project here. So we've got our character moving, and now this is the same character that's set up in that component-based character movement video, which is from our dungeon crawler series in Phaser 3, I think 3.24 or so. So we're going to take this character and put a little UI bar like right above her head here, and we're going to use our component system for that. So I'm going to make myself smaller here. Okay, so let me just go over this scene really briefly, but it's going to be basically the same as what is left off in the component-based character movement video. So we just have the scene called the UI bar scene. We're just going to do this UI bar stuff in this scene. So we've got our component service. This is this thing, which we built in that component video, but it's in our services folder here. We're not going to go over making this, but it's the same one from that video that I'm mentioning. And we're going to use that components service for our components here. And so this is just set up. We're loading our asset for this character. We're loading a pot, so that when I press P here, a random pot spawns. That's just going to show you how to layer this UI bar on your player above everything else in your game. And then, so we don't need this. This is just my test from previous. Doesn't do anything. Okay, so we're setting up in our crate here in this scene, just making our player, adding it to the scene, and then making the animations and just setting her up. And so we're using these components from our previous videos. We've got our keyboard movement component and the animation on input components. And we've added both of these to our character already. And then this key up P is just for our pot, so that when we press P, we randomly spawn a pot, and it's a static pot, so our character can't run through it. So what we're going to want to do is create this UI bar, like on top of their head, like right here, and then it's going to want to be always on top of everything else in the game. So first, let's make our UI bar. And so just going over here, this is the update where our components update. Every component can have an update in it. And that's it for this scene. So now we're going to start by making a new component. Let's go to our components folder, new. We can call it, let's see, UI bar component. Let's say, you can name this something else. UI bar component. So we're going to import our iComponent interface from our component service, iComponent. So what we're going to do is export default class. We're going to call this UI bar component, and it's going to implement our iComponent interface. Now iComponent, let me just go here, basically says init, optional awake, optional start, optional update, and optional destroy. So we'll definitely need an init, and what init does is it's going to give us a reference to a game object that this component belongs to. So it's going to be of type phaser. I do like to import phaser if I'm using it at all. .GameObjects. So it's going to be a game object. Private game object. So we're going to add a class property here, which is also going to be GameObjects.GameObject. Now this exclamation mark is in TypeScript syntax, just to say that, trust me, this class property is going to exist. And so basically with our components, if init is never called, you have bigger problems. So GameObjects should definitely exist. So do that. Good. Now in our case here, we're going to call on our start method of the components. These are the component lifecycle hooks. So start gets called when the component is ready, when all the components have been added to a game object, and awake has been called when all of them, then start gets called. So check out our previous videos for more information on that. So here we're going to make a graphic, just a very simple graphics bar. So let's just do, let's get our scene from our game object, and then we're going to do graphics scene.add.graphics. We're going to set it to 0, 0. Now we're going to move our bar based on where the character is. We're going to do that in update. So we will need an update. Let's do that here. We won't need DT, so, but we'll just leave that there anyway. So graphics, let's go set, how about fill style? Fill style. And let's just say we have a background that's white. Graphics.fillRect. And let's say, well, let's just set this to 0, 0, 0, 0 in the graphics itself. And then let's just say a width of 25 and a height of 4. Okay. Now let's say, now we need to move the graphics when the player moves. So we actually need to make this a class property. So let's go private graphics. This could be undefined. Let's just say start doesn't get called for some reason, which would be a problem, but you never know. So we're going to make that graphics phaser.gameObjects.graphics. Do this.graphics, and then change this, and change that. Now here, if there's no graphics, so if not this.graphics, for instance, it could be undefined or not set. We're going to do nothing in this update. If there is a graphics, we're going to do this.graphics.x, and it's just going to be this.gameObject.x. Now you see we don't have this x in our game object because the game object type itself actually doesn't have x and y. Now usually in Phaser you use images or sprites, and they have a bunch of components in the Phaser world that adds x and y. That is the transform component. So let's just say, since we know our game object is going to be a sprite, or it's going to be some game object that supports x and y, phaser.gameObjects.components.transform. Now this ampersand basically means to combine these types. So we're combining the game object type with this component's transform type. And we're going to do that here as well. To make spaces. Right, so there's our type. And now we have x and y on our game object, so that TypeScript knows that we have x and y. We would have had it anyway, since JavaScript, when a game is running, we would have been given a game object that had x and y. But just to make TypeScript happy, we do that. All right. So now this is going to update, and it's going to move our bar as our player moves. So this is our basic component. Now let's just add it to our character in our UI bar scene here. So let's go here. We're going to import UI bar component from components, UI bar component. Now just like we were adding these other components, right, you see their keyboard movement, which is how we can move this around, and our animation and input, which is what handles what animations to change to when you're moving. Going to add another one here. Components.add component, this.player, new UI bar component. There's no parameters. So let's save that. Let's see this update. And let's see. Rerun my server just in case here. Okay. Alright, so there's our bar. Now it's at 0, 0, which is not really where we want it to be. Let's go back here. So now there's a couple of ways we can change this. We can set the X and Y of the graphics itself, which is what it's doing here. So we can set offsets to the graphics X based on the game object X. So let's say we do that. So here we're going to say, let's say minus the half width. So in this case it's 12.5. That's half width of our bar. And then here, let's just say minus 15. And there we go. Now you do see that, right? You can notice that the bar is like moving just slightly slower than the character. You see it like moves back towards it. Now we can fix that. So the issue here is actually in the update calls. We're doing update in here, which is called by the main update. But at this point, the character may not have actually moved yet. So we can go here. What we're going to use instead here is this .events .on. We're going to use the scenes post update. So let's see, scenes.events post update, also known as a late update in some other game engines if you're familiar with them. So we're just going to say we're going to make a late update here. We haven't made this yet, but we're going to do that. So we want a late update over here. Let's make a late update. It gets the same total time and delta time since last frame. And instead of calling this an update, I'm going to call this a late update. And then you can see now that it moves with it exactly. There's no like small, like couple of pixel off as it moves, so it's better tracking our character. So that's awesome. All right, next here, so that's our bar. Now we're going to not do too much logic here for filling a bar. If you do want to check that out, we have a create animation health bar here in our blog. We'll link this in the description below. But for video, we also have in our side scroller series this health bar animation where we put a little health bar in the top UI, which is very similar. You just got to move that logic down to here. So we're just going to leave this as is for our bar on top of our character. If you want to move this below, obviously, instead of minus 15, you can just do plus 15. And so let's go back to our scene here. Now, let's press P. Oh, I meant to press P here. We got a pot. And you see now that our bar is actually below the pot, which is not what we want. Our UI should be on top of everything. So there's a couple of ways to solve this. So in Phaser 3.50 and higher, so now we're using 3.54, so there's layers. So we could use layers, and let's just show you, I'll show you right now, real quick, how we could use layers. So let's just say this is layer 1, add dot layer, and then let's just say UI layer. Now, obviously calling this layer 1 is not so good. We just call this game layer, right? Let's just say. So now we have these layers. What we want to do is in our game layer add our player to it, and then each time we make a pot, we can do game layer add the created pot like this. Now this will actually already work because our bar on top of our character is actually added after the layer is added, this game layer. So we don't really need this UI layer. If we're doing it this way, it's already on top. But for consistency's sake, what we can do is actually just pass in a UI layer into our component here, right? If you did want to make sure that you have it organized in a way where your game objects are on their right layers, you can go to our component here, go to our constructor, and say we're going to take in a layer, which is a phaser type of type phaser.gameObjects.layer. We do layer phaser.gameObjects.layer layer. And then what we do when we add our graphics here, let's just say here, this.layer.add this.graphics. So now this will put our layer into our UI layer. Now nothing will change visually, it'll still work. So that's expected, right? It's on top. But that does mean you have to go in your scene, your normal scene here, and make sure you, after going, this dot scene dot add or this dot physics dot add, that you then do another game layer dot add. Now, of course, you could have like helper functions to do that, but that just seems still a little bit messy. So instead of this, let's just get rid of these layers and just say we don't want to use layers. Not going to be another way to resolve this is by creating another scene. And so what we're going to do is actually create another scene. So let's just delete that. We will want something in here, and it's going to be a scene. So this is in our UI bar component. We're going to take in a scene, phaser.scene. Scene. And instead of layer, we're going to change this to scene. We're going to basically put all of our UI stuff in a separate scene. So instead of doing this, instead of using the scene of our own game, of the game object this component is attached to, we're going to use the scene passed in. Right? Now, just to make the game run right now, we can do this, and let's say if not this dot scene, we have a problem. Actually, I can do this const scene, this dot scene, or this dot game object dot scene, so that we can default to the game object scene if no scene is passed in. Right, all the errors are gone, and this still works. Let's get a better pot. Right, so as expected, we didn't do our new scene yet, so now our UI bar is back under our pot. We removed all the layers since it was an okay solution, but not the best. So now let's actually make another file in our scenes folder right here. I'm going to call this UI scene. And we're going to have import phaser. Let's actually collapse. Import phaser from phaser. Now, it's just like making any other scene. Export default class. We're going to call this UI scene. Extends phaser.scene constructor, and we're going to give it an ID here. Just call it UI. That's all we need to put in the scene. Now, we've done other videos on the channel about putting UI into scenes. These are like HUD UIs, not necessarily UI that follows a character around. So this is a little bit different. You can still put HUD UI in here, of course. It does help you organize that. Just in the create, you can just add your like UI in the top left here for number of lives or score or something like that. We have a bunch of videos in our side scroller series and in our dungeon crawler series that looks through that. But we're going to make this blank scene, and we're going to be adding stuff to it dynamically in our UI bar component. So to make this work, we need to add our scene here in main. UI scene from scenes UI scene. Okay, so we have that. Now this is where I had that scene run before. So here, once we start, let's just run our UI scene. So this dot scene dot run. So this means we're going to run our UI scene with our current UI bar scene. And just for cleanup, we're going to do this dot scene dot stop, so that whoever's in charge of starting a scene should also stop it. So that's what we're doing here, and shut down. All right, cool. So now here we have our scene, it's running. We can actually show you that it's running. We'll just go to, just do a create here, console.log, running UI scene. Now we should get a log out here. So our UI scene is running. And so what we want to do to get the scene to pass into this UI bar component is this dot scene dot get, and we can just pull the current running UI scene instance. And now, okay, so you can't tell anything is different. The bar is still here, it's still moving, but this bar is in fact on the other scene. We can prove that pressing P. Here we go, closer pot. You can see it is now above our pot. So this little UI element, this bar above the character's head, is in our UI scene, and it is layered above everything in our normal game scene, let's say. And so with doing it this way without not using the layers are still useful for different other things. But in this case, it is still more convenient using a UI specific scene to then just add all the UI there. It's going to overlay on top of your normal scene, and your z-index will be correct. So that is a UI bar on top of your player. And so now the great thing about these components is you can pass in any scene here, right? The way that this is just architect or organized. This class doesn't care what scene you give it. It could be nothing, in which case it takes the GameObject scene. It could be a specific UI scene. You could pass in the specific GameObject scene if you wanted to. So all it cares is that there is a scene, it's going to add it to that scene. So it's a bit more flexible. You could do it here by just getting a reference to the scene, and then inside your UI bar scene, handle all of that basic logic that you would have in this UI bar component. But I think you can see being able to organize your logic into your UI bar component instead of being littered all over your normal game scene is just easier to look at and easier to think about. So if you wanted to build more complex logic here for your health bar or whatever meter you're showing, you can do it in here and then just attach it to any game object. So of course we can actually attach these to pots. So we've got some time. For fun here, we can attach our UI bar component here to a pot, and really it requires almost no work from us other than doing this. And so I haven't tested this, so we're just doing this live. P. And so our pot now has, well, you can see this one because it's off screen, but you can see our pots now have meters. And all we really had to do was add our UI bar component to this pot, and now our pot magically has this functionality. No extra code was written. It's just the component system is a great way to organize your code. So if you've enjoyed these component system videos using Phaser 3.50 and higher, do like this video and subscribe to this channel for more videos on making games on the web with technologies like Phaser and Kabam and Calicious and all kinds of other things that we're going to be looking at.